Hi, Karl, Jim, and Paula.
Yes.
We will start soon.
Good, right?
In a few minutes.
Só um aviso, Júlio, para Adelaide, que ela precisa trocar de sala. Você está na próxima, né? E a sua próxima é na outra sala.
No outro link.
No outro link.
We are waiting for Nancy Perloff.
Wow, look at that.
Jimenez. Paula. Hello, Paula.
Hello, Karl. Oh, great. We've been working since 1982 together.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
So, who else?
Nice to meet you, Paula. Good to see you, Karl.
And you too.
I was just looking at your sunflower power video on YouTube.
Oh, lovely. Oh, good. That was such a marvelous experience.
It looked like
2001. Fernando Aguirre recommended me to do that. Yeah.
Looked like people were having fun.
Oh, yes. Extraordinary.
Big sunflowers, too.
Yes. Oh, they were given to us by the festival, 100 of them.
Wow.
And when we threw them into the Rio Douro, they bounced.
They looked like they had interesting power.
Oh, they did indeed. They went upstream. I thought they were going out to sea, but I'd forgotten the tide. So they went upstream and then they came back again.
Fantastic.
Gosh.
And Karl, great to see you.
Likewise.
Wonderful.
I had no idea. There was miscommunication. I just found out about this moment about an hour ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but fortunately,
well done.
I just finished an article that I will be sharing about that will be uploaded on Synapse once it's ready to go.
Okay, cool. I'm
Glad
going
you are here, Karl.
Yeah.
We did
Timing
it.
worked.
Yeah.
The gods are with us.
Yeah. So, do you have something to show? You want to test it, or?
Yeah, I have a images ready to go that I can share.
You can do it. It's only share screen and
share screen with preview.
Yeah. Okay.
I've already have that set up.
Usually it works. And for Paula,
yes,
Paula, we have your image too. We will show it. Yeah.
Yes.
We have. Yeah.
Is it on the gallery now?
Sorry?
Is it on the gallery now?
Oh, I don't know yet, but we have the image.
You have. I only want to show 2 of them.
Okay, no problem. I will do it.
Otherwise, I shall be showing you some stones. Can you see this?
Yes.
Pumice.
Amazing. Stone poetry.
Yes. So I thought Nancy was going to introduce us.
Yes, Nancy
is here, I think.
Is here. I think is here.
Oh.
Nancy?
Hello, Nancy.
Do you hear us?
Well, I think is she here? I don't think she is.
Yes.
Oh
yes,
yeah.
She is. She is.
Good. No, I would say she's here, but oh, there she is. You're on, Nancy.
Okay.
Oh.
Hello. How long is our session? An hour?
45 minutes.
45 minutes. So each talk is roughly how long?
Roughly 45 minutes minus, or 15 minutes minus what? I guess it was supposed to start at 9:45. So yeah, we're still on time. So 15 minutes minus your introductions, I guess. And
okay.
however
so
much we want to have
still,
at the end.
We are still on time. Each one has 15 minutes for your speech.
And are we allowing time for questions or not?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
We will have 15 minutes too.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm happy to get started.
Right.
My name is Nancy Perloff. I'm curator of modern and contemporary collections at the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles, California, and I'm delighted to be here for this symposium. Very much enjoyed yesterday. So let me introduce the speakers. We'll start with Paula Claire,
yes,
and we'll then move to Karl Kempton and to Jim Andrews. And I'll try to keep these brief and just capturing the essence. Paula Claire is a sound poet, a visual poet, and a concrete poet. She began writing poetry on May 4th, 1961, according to her website, when she was living near Primrose Hill, Northamptonshire. From the outset, the sound of words and their relationship to music was paramount for her. Her major influence was Gerard Manley Hopkins. She moved to Oxford in 1968 and published her first booklet, Mobile Poems, Greece. She always invites vocal participation.
Yes.
Because she considers poetry an oral, communal art. She thinks about two different kinds of participation: responsive voices, these are her expressions, and interactive voices. Her meeting with Bob Cobbing in '69 was a seminal event in her work, and we all of course, can understand why that would be the case. He produced over 1,000 booklets. He ran weekly workshops in sound and visual poetry. And Paula Claire's archive, her very vast archive, has much of Bob Cobbing's work.
It does.
And over the years, Paula has exchanged work with fellow poets, and this work has often gone into her archive. And I'll just say finally that the GRI, the Research Institute where I work, has a number of Paula Claire's works through our purchase of the Jean Brown archive. And this is a significant addition for us. So thank you so much. Let's welcome Paula Claire.
Shall I start my timer now? I have a timer. Right.
Sounds good.
Well, welcome everybody to my study archive by the River Thames in Oxford. And my short talk today is called My Gestation of Language Research. Gestation, that's the embryonic development before birth. The very origins of communication systems all over the world. How did they occur? For me, one way is studying how the earliest indigenous peoples lived, and some of them are carrying on their traditions to this day, outstandingly in Australia, with song lines and rock drawings. They show us that survival depends on reading their surroundings, scanning their environment for telltale marks and lines. Everything has significance and must be interpreted, from trails of foot or paw prints on the ground, the scratches, graffiti of creatures, the multifarious effects of weather, the changing signs in the dome of the sky, day and night. Now, it's impossible not to voice these discoveries, exclaiming, oh, ah, oh, ah, joining the creatures in uttering sounds in response. From earliest times, we have evidence of human scratchings and handprints on caves. Nowadays, tribes continue to bend twigs to find their way through jungle or leave signs to help others. I see Aleph, the first square in this colloquium's homepage, as 3 crossed twigs, as well as the head and horns of a bull. The second way to learn of embryonic language development, well, we've all experienced it as babies. And when it's our turn to pass on the communications to the next generation, we experience it all over again. In 1972, our son was born to me and my husband, stained glass artist Paul Sankashani, and experiencing how our baby acquired language and my part in it was the biggest learning curve of my life. Used to the formal language of intellectual discourse, what a shock! Okay. You can't talk to a baby. Communication is sheer sound poetry. And of course, you go into hugging and tickling and patting. I didn't know I knew baby language, but it's in our DNA. And I observed how he put his hands all over me, what I was wearing, feeling their textures and letting out little sounds. And when his eyes focused on what I had on my jumper, my knitted jumper, then again, he would make response to those patternings. Nursery rhymes, nonsense verse, lullabies, all program infants with sound patterns issuing from the maternal font. They underlie all more complex human communication and urge towards written codification. When we put a crayon into a little one's hands, how they love to make their marks. Their writing will be all over your walls if you don't look out. At this time, performing with poet colleague Bob Cobbing his extraordinary distorted letterform smudged mimeographs as scores, my personal experience as a mother, I moved away. It coalesced with the visual poetry I was creating, and I moved away from my typewriter text aisles, and some of these were illustrated in Women in Concrete Poetry 1959 to 79, published last year by Primary Information Press, New York. Suddenly, I perceived all marks and lines on natural objects, stones, leaves, tree bark, feathers, shells, seeds, as proto-language, signals I spontaneously vocalized. And this approach has remained at the core of my distinctive practice, which is also participatory. Now, after graduating from University College London, I had begun exploring language in 1961 with condensed permutated images, morphing into my non-linear mobile poems in 1966 when teaching English in Athens. On returning to England in 1968, I bought Anthology of Concrete Poetry, that's the Williams Hanshaw Mayer book, and I was delighted to learn I was part of a world movement. I discovered Bob Cobbing's pioneering work in that book. I met him at a conference in 1969. He invited me to present our sound poetry in that seminal question mark concrete poetry exhibition at the Stedelijk, Amsterdam. That was November 1970. And then he founded Concrete Canticle to perform our work. And first it was on the vinyl LP when the show was adopted by the Arts Council and toured the UK. At that time, I was absorbed in using words and letter forms as simultaneously visual poems and performance scores. But a big change in direction came in 1973 at the Poetry Society London at a Cobbing workshop in sound and visual poetry. I gave my intuitive vocal response to a miscellany of stones I'd picked up from all sorts of locations in early years, fascinated by their variety and primordial quality, uniting us in the colossal energies that have formed and still form our planet. So here is the first one. It's a sea-smoothed pebble. And another one, that one is sharp-edged, spark-emitting, fire-giving flint. And my favorite is a lovely slate poem. And this one, it's covered in the most extraordinary signs, including a Roman A, Aleph. That's alpha, the beginning. And finally, I want to show you this one. This is Pumice, and it makes our lips imitate the shapes. Oh, 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 omega. Well, I handed all these stones round to the people there, and they joined in. So that shows that synesthesia is not some freakish quality I have. It's in our psyche, deep embedded in a psyche of all of us. And so I believe that this kind of utterance that I make and we can all make to natural objects, it's not a performance, but it's accessing ancient memories, ancestral memories imprinted deep in the subconscious of how the original peoples of this earth responded to their environment. Here we experience the underlying gestation of letter forms and ideograms and the indivisibility of sign and utterance. My colleague Bob Cobbing published my collaged photographic documentation of this vocal response to stones, I called Stone Tones, in his Writers' Forum Press, London, 1974. Well, it's rare now, but it was purchased from Bob by the Sackner Archive, and that's the largest collection of concrete, visual and sound poetry, and it's now housed, as I dare say you all know, at the University of Iowa. And also, Stone Tones is in the special collection of Princeton University that has acquired recently a body of my work. In London, the National Poetry Library has it, and University College Little Press store. UCL is my alma mater. And with the Slade School of Art, it will hold their second online conference, Spineless Wonders, that's little press books without bindings, on the 18th and 19th of February next year, focusing on my stone tones. And they were published by Cobbing in the format of 8 mimeoprints in a large envelope. So these pages are dual purpose. They're visual poems and displayable artworks. Next, I turn my attention to vocal response to markings on leaves. Now, here is what I picked today. These are variegated laurel leaves that I called as a poem, Poetry Laurels, 1975, each unique with its random patterning. And if you want to hear me working with one of these leaves, you can access www.archiveofthenow.org, which is run by Queen Mary, University of London. My first opportunity to give a really large-scale outdoor performance incorporating a range of such scores was at the Materialization of Language, curated by my dear colleague, the late Mirella Bentivoglio, at Venice Biennale 1978. I stood on the quayside outside the old Salt Store exhibition hall in the sunset, inviting everyone to join in my Code Stones of Venice, a treated text of some of the pages of John Ruskin's Stones of Venice, that was 1851, combined with my tracings of script, here we go, of the marble of a step of Santa Maria della Salute. That's the one I have given you. And I took rubbings of the walls, and I performed to reflections in the water, and everyone there was saying unifying chants in English and Italian. That was published by Bob, 1978, and I've republished it last year. Now, my repertoire of natural objects for vocalization is now huge, and just a few examples. Silver birch bark, Silver Birch Morse, 1978, spots inside 15 foxgloves, all unique. That was called Bee Bibles, 1980. Well, here are the barcode patterns on sunflower seeds. Artist book Sunpower Flower 2001. That was for Porto European Capital of Culture performance. And then markings on the bellies of newts. Great Crested Newt Sonata 2009. And I've just done Vine Tendrils, my artist book, Vine Script 2021. So in conclusion, I believe that our vast expanding field of concrete visual sound performance poetries is a comprehensive study of the evolution of language in all its diversity. Last year, I published a limited edition artist book, From Word to Art, Browsing the Paula Claire Archive, and that's been bought by the British Library. And this is my collection gathered by exchanging my work with fellow practitioners worldwide for about 50 years. I gave a copy to Fernando Aguirre's archive because he's in the book, and we've been exchanging work since the early 80s, as with Karl Kempton. Part 1 shows how poets have focused on the earliest forms of communications. Just quick examples. Anna Hatherley draws 4 elemental forms, maybe echoing branches. Giovanni Fontana's page is typed and overtyped with no ribbon, making a mesh of subtle textures. Paolo Bruschi sent me a miracle of thread on a card entitled Linea Poetica. Maria Ley contributed her Machine Threads book, Imitating Script, and Vladimir Diespino sent his prehistory, all those cards showing drawings of the earliest marks on walls. I hope, therefore, that this short talk today will encourage you to delight in marks, lines, textures everywhere in our natural environment, for they are humanity's first book. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, Paula.
Managed not to overshoot.
the performative aspect. Thank you so much. I want to introduce Karl Kempton. Karl Kempton is an American poet, a minimalist concrete poet who published Cauldron magazine on paper between 1976 and 1990. And there's an important web page on this publication and on his work. This publication, Cauldron magazine, was the world's first regularly published magazine that strove to include all modes of visual poetry. It published the minimalist concrete, and Kempton's Visual Poetry, A Brief History of Ancestral Roots and Modern Traditions, provides a balanced and coherent overview of about as much of the genre as a single person can comprehend. So thank you very much. Welcome, Karl Kempton.
Thank you. What I would like to talk to today about is an is an article that will be uploaded soon on Synapse International. It's a blog that is hosted in Calcutta that I oversee and is co-directed with Phil Davenport of Apple Pie Editions. The article is titled Cleveland Concrete. Now, in American concrete visual poetry history, what is presented from my point of view generally among the academics is more lineage than history. For example, they leave out Kenneth Patchen whenever you discuss concrete poetry. He was born in Ohio and was a major influence on the concrete poets of Cleveland. Whenever, and Paula mentioned this anthology, the Williams anthology. The first anthology that is pointed to generally in America as the first concrete poetry anthology is the Williams anthology. That is not the case. And the first actually true American anthology is Cleveland Concrete, 1966. It is all American. All other anthologies published after that were essentially internationally dominated and edited from an international point of view. What went on in Cleveland has continued to be ignored, except perhaps as a side whenever D.A. Levy is mentioned. But before D.A. Levy, there was somebody else in the pre-concrete era who created some masterpieces, and his name is Russell Atkins. He was the founder and co-editor of the Black avant-garde magazine Freelance that he founded in 1950. He has several works that were published before 1955 that are absolutely, in my opinion, can be looked upon as concrete. And this is one of the problems with what I see in American overview of concrete poetry and visual poetry histories is those who have been left out of these narratives. And I've taken it upon myself as a practitioner of visual poetry to bring these voices and visions and sounds to the forefront. And I overlooked this group when I was writing my book, A History of Visual Text Art. I was going through my archives, digitizing them, and realized I made a big mistake and overlooked, and I only mentioned them in passing. So the article that will be coming out is about 15,000 words with a few illustrations. I contextualize these poets because another group, the first American visual poetry was published by the Steiglitz Circle in 1915, 1916 in the magazine 291.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
This is generally overlooked. And what is further overlooked is the Steiglitz Circle word painters during the 20s. And I also incorporate within this discussion a narrative which is close to what Paula would be enthralled with, is iconographics. Iconographics is a form of language. Actually, it carries much more information. And iconographic painting and word painting by the Steiglitz Circle continued, and you can include the iconographics of Georgia O'Keeffe, in my opinion. There's a whole story, but the Cleveland Concrete Poets are another ignored group. And Russell Atkins was the first, and I ran across him there was an interview with him on Jacket 2, which also had a link by Craig Dworkin to a long reading of the poem Spiritual. And in the interview, Atkins is the first American poet that I came across that understood that before concrete poetry, there was music concrete.
Yeah.
And he was a musician and an avant-garde musician. And he has a statement saying, I was avant-garde before I knew I was avant-garde. Because he followed his voice, he didn't follow any school. So he got in trouble with Black politics and Black literature on one hand, because he followed his own voice, though he was a very active individual in his own way. So it is Russell Atkins who mentored D.A. Levy. And shortly thereafter, Kent Taylor. And the two of them, Kent Taylor and D.A. Levy, were schooled in international concrete poetry at the Asphodel bookstore by James Lowell. They came across Old Tired Horse in that bookstore. In Cleveland, there was this miracle for the avant-garde that created what was called the Cleveland Renaissance. And Atkins is one of the legs of it. The Levy, of course, with his hyperactivity, Kent Taylor, these two individuals, Kent and D.A., in turn mentored the younger poets of Cleveland. Out of this came Cleveland Concrete. It was mimeograph publication in part, but also D.A. Levy had a small letterhead press. So a year after they came across international concrete, D.A. Levy began publishing concrete chapbooks. The first one was in late November 1964. So Cleveland is part of what is called the Fourth Coast of America and Canada. It's all along the Great Lakes. Carl Jung brought that term to my attention. He called the Great Lake cities the Fourth Coast. So we have Cleveland from if you want to begin with Atkins, 1950 to D.A. Levy's suicide in 1968 as essentially the center of American concrete poetry. And this story has been ignored and overlooked. D.A. Levy also published international figures he created 2 series of concrete chapbooks, and he published two international figures. He also published B.B. Nichols' first concrete poetry.
Oh, great.
He published some from Cleveland, a lot from Cleveland, but he also published Canadians. So what we have here in letterpress concrete, he created these chapbooks, which are essentially, you can consider maybe kinetic, optic, because you would turn the page. So how fast you turn the page depended upon the scene that was being presented. For instance, there was one called Mist by Kent Taylor. So how fast you want the mist to move over the city, depending on how fast you move the page, and so on and so forth. So what I want to do is, if I can figure out how to share, I want to show you another thing that brought me to write this article. And that is, there was a problem that I solved, and at first I didn't know what it was, is that Atkins' poem Spiritual, he used the Old English spelling with the Y's instead of the I.
Oh.
And so he has a poem Spiritual dealing with also rain. And I believe that this should be part of the rain poems that exist, beginning with Alpoliere and Naikuni. I think this is just as important. And I don't know if you folks are familiar with Paul Reps and his calligraphic visual poems. He has 3 rain poems. And if I can bring this up and try to share, let me see. Can you see? This is Alpoliere's poem. If you can see it, it's raining.
Yeah.
All right, here's Paul Reps, one of his rain poems.
Uh-huh.
And then let's see if I can make this bigger, or I'll shrink it down. This is an example of his calligraphics. And here's another one. Paul Reps, you may know of him of Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. He has several, he sold more visual poem books that weren't called visual poem books than visual poets, and probably most of them together. Now here is a spiritual poem by Atkins, 1950.
Ah.
This is on the Eclipse site. I redid this, retyped it, because here's the story. Atkins did not use the quote marks. What happened was, as I determined, that the small letterpress set that D.A. Levy had did not have the slash type to set. So he typed this as a single poem chapbook. This is my re-rendering of it as he said it was. So this is 1950. And there's other poems that he did.
Oh, great.
I will show you. This is the last one known, The Storm Shall Break. Dworkin uses this on the cover of one of his books as a homage. This is a poem around 1951.
Gosh.
He had a 6-page long poem in Berlot Journal in 1951. Now I'll just jump quick. This is D.A. Levy overtype. This is from Tibetan Stroboscope. He made 3,000 copies of it and destroyed most of them before he committed suicide. I happen to have one of the few copies, and this is one of the pages. This is an example of destructive writing that he called it. We call it treated text.
Yeah.
But if you go into the history of treated text, we have Doris Cross, who I published.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In issue 16, dedicated the entire volume to her work. She began treated text for the Webster Dictionary 1913 in 1965.
Yeah.
Before Phillips began his famous
work.
Work.
Yes, good.
So there is, there's a lot more I can say, but the article will be up. It's, like I said, it's 15,000 words long. Creating the context of what was going on in Cleveland, the right-wing politics that was going on that led in part to D.A. Levy's suicide, because the cops went after the poets of Cleveland real hardcore, because their concrete poetry was political, a lot of it. It wasn't just geometric arrays of aesthetic presentation. There is a site called Cleveland Memory that you can look up D.A. Levy under it, and there are a lot of free PDFs that are available that will give you access to just a hint of what was going on in Cleveland during that time. So with that, I will open it to questions. Any questions?
Or we might want to hold questions for the end.
Yeah, I think questions are at the end.
I think if people could keep questions in mind or in the chat, and we can have our final talk, and then we'll have everybody staying very well on time, that we'll have 15 minutes for questions. So thank you very much, Karl, for your talk, and Paula. I wanted to introduce Jim Andrews, who's our third speaker. He's Canadian, if I understand correctly.
That's right.
Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, okay. He's a net artist, poet, programmer, visual and audio artist, mathematician, and essayist. He's been publishing vispo.com since 1996. He completed a degree in English and mathematics at the University of Victoria in Canada in '83, and then produced a literary radio show called Fine Lines, and later Frame, for 6 years, that he distributed each week to 15 campus stations in Canada. He encountered the radio art and theoretical writing of Gregory Whitehead and other audio writers, which showed him the importance of understanding one's medium. And after producing the radio show, he went back to school and studied computer science and mathematics. After that, it wasn't long before the web emerged, which Andrews saw as the perfect medium for someone seeking to combine writing, programming, visual and audio art in an international scene of epistolary correspondence about the art and poetics and sharing outline of the art itself. So please welcome Jim Andrews.
Right.
Thanks for the introduction, Nancy. And thanks also to Julio and the others who have organized this, and to Karl and Paula. I visited Brazil in, I think it was around 2007, and met Giselle Bagelman and Marcus Bastos and Lucia Santaella, who was kind enough to bring me down to Brazil. And so It was amazing. It was an amazing experience to visit Brazil. Yes, so as Nancy indicated, I'm a poet, but I'm also a programmer, and I've tried over the years to also learn something about visual art, and I produced a radio show, a literary radio show, so I'm into sound art. And actually I got an essay from Gregory Whitehead the other day, a draft of an essay from Gregory Whitehead the other day that I'm reading. But so I try to combine it all in my work that is all on the net. When you go to my site, you're not seeing documentation about things that are elsewhere. This is the work itself. My life's work is on the internet. It's adapted to the internet. It is net art. It's interactive poetry. It's interactive audio. It's often very visual. And so what I'd like to do in this brief span of time is show you how to access that if you're interested.
Yeah.
And you know, have at it, because it's interactive. It's stuff that you may not have seen before. So anyway, I'll send you a link here in the chat. So this is the gateway to all of my writings, but not just writings, the visual and everything else. My site is, here's a link to my site itself, to the home page of my site. And the one above that is a link to the writings page, link to the writings. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Can you see the writings page?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you click essays and books, this takes you to the essays and books. And oh, by the way, I've got a workshop coming up on Saturday, November the 13th, which is this upcoming Saturday, from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific time, Vancouver time. I'm in Vancouver, Canada. And this is a workshop on some software, some visual poetry software that I've been working on since 2011, actually. This is a program called Aleph Null. And it's an interactive, generative program online that you can access. And I've produced a whole lot of work, a whole lot of visual work, some of which is in collaboration with Karl Kempton, that has a lot of range, a lot of visual range, a lot of stylistic range. And so this workshop is free and available if you're interested. And there's a link on the writings page up at the very top, the one that says Aleph Null Workshop, that takes you to a PDF concerning the workshop. So if you're interested, you're more than welcome. So this page has links to most of my projects. Here's one called Neonio, and this is an interactive sound piece. Actually, I guess I need to stop the share for a second, and I need to share the sound as well. I don't think I did that, so let me do that. Okay, yeah. So this is a piece called Neonio, which is an interactive audio piece. When I click the link to go into Neonio, and do you see the You see the animated text now? Okay. So this is a piece that I did in 2000, actually. It was commissioned by Turbulence.org in New York, and Helen Thorington, who previously was commissioning radio art, actually, but then the web came along and she started commissioning net art. And so this was actually the first piece that I did that I got paid to actually do, which was thrilling. Paid to do art? What a concept. And so I did this in 2000 in a program called Director, which by now is obsolete. You can't access it in Director any more than you can access things in Flash. But I retooled to JavaScript and HTML and CSS, which is the language of the web now for the browser. And I redid this piece. Actually, it's an upgrade. So we get this page, and then say if I click this, you get a sound and an animation. And if I click, say, this one, you get another sound and another animation. So I sang this and recorded it and wrote the programming and did the visuals. And this has really good keyboard control as well, so you can play it like an instrument, or you can use the mouse to click these icons. And there's also a verse too, so that when you drag these icons into the grid. Then I can change the color, say, of the. Anyway, that is Neonio. Well, there's the site that you were mentioning, Paula, which I look forward to delving into, the British Innovative Poetry site. And here we are back at the writing site. Here's can you see the page still?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a recent piece that I did called City on the Other Side of Time. So I produced this using the Aleph Null software. And so with Aleph Null, you feed it folders of images, and it samples from those images and creates new images. And the folder of images that I fed Aleph Null in this case consists of excuse me, images mainly from the 15th to the 18th centuries.
Oh yeah, they're wonderful.
Yeah. You'll be familiar with many of these images, actually.
You still have to catch up with that beauty.
Yeah, that's right. And the project that I initially used these images in is called alchemical cosmography, because many of the images are, they either have to do with alchemy or with cosmography, in the sense of, pics of the cosmos. But then it occurred to me at a certain point, I thought, well, I could actually produce a lot of images that were more sort of focused around the idea of a city or a location, by including, like, for instance, the work of Lorenz Storr, who produced these really interesting Escher Escher-like images in the 1500s, and De Vries, some images by De Vries, but these are all publicly licensed images, so that I'm actually able to use these in these sorts of productions. And the internet gives us these publicly licensed images, access to these publicly licensed images. So that's one of the projects, is City on the Other Side of Time. Here's a collaboration with Bill Bissett. You may have heard of the Canadian poet Bill Bissett. He's been involved in concrete poetry for a long time. And I met Bill back in the 80s. And but I think I'm just about out of time, aren't I? I think 10:30 is the limit for me. Is that right? Yeah, I think it is, because it ends at 10:45. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, you have access to all this stuff through the page that I indicated, that is linked in the chat. And so let me stop the sharing of that screen. There we go. So thanks very much, and I guess it's a time for questions and discussion.
Yeah, very interesting.
Thanks.
Yes, I think we're ready to take questions. Thank you very much from all three speakers. All quite different in certain ways, yeah, which makes it very interesting. I see there's some comments in the chat, but are there questions from our audience? Yes, right here. Demosthenes Agrafiotis. Yes, please.
Yeah. Let's say good evening from Athens, but it's a good afternoon for you in Brazil. I have 3 questions. One question for each speaker. For the first, have you been in Athens? You said in the 60s?
Yes.
In Greece?
Yes.
But what a pity, because
yeah,
there was a group also of experimental poets in Athens. And yeah. And we have done a lot of work. If you go to my site, Demosthenes Agrafiotis, you can see. So it's pity that we don't, but probably it's time to have a contact.
No.
It's never is too late. So it's quite interesting. My question is quite different, because you have tried to see the origins of languages, the origins of speaking, and things like that. We know that a lot of research have been done, not only by poets and linguists, but also by zoologists, people who, and they try to find the origin, and they give another version about the origin. So have you ever an inspiration from this kind of works? That's for you. For Karl Kempton, it's very interesting, this story about concrete poetry, because as we change countries, the concrete poetry and visual poetry, if you relate it to social class, there's a big change. For instance, in France, all this experimental poetry, it was a question of haute bourgeoisie. In England, in England, it was more popular. It was part of the resistance of lower classes to literary tradition.
Certainly with Bob,
Is correct that or not? That's so it's very interesting to see also in the United States there was concrete and visual poetry has something to do with some kind of social and political resistance. This is my question. And the third, for the third speaker, Jim Andrews, my question is quite, let's say, because his work is so amazing, so beautiful, so explosive. So it's a discovery. But there is no any effort to be critical to this network and this new technologies. Because we know that all these technologies, they have also a political power and gives always the power to more powerful. So how in your work, how to receive your work when we have in our mind all these manipulations of power in global way? Sorry, thank you.
Why don't you begin, Paula?
Oh gosh, I don't quite know where to start there. I hate this word class. To me, we're all, you know, poets, creative people, everybody. And my work, when I ask people to join in, I want everybody to feel creative. And so certainly Bob was very consciously working against poetic tradition that is extremely strong. For instance, I'm speaking here from Oxford. I have no allies in Oxford. I have lots of allies all over the world.
You are very lucky. Very lucky. You are very lucky. Very lucky. You are very lucky. I have allies in Oxford. That means
who is that?
You have a fight, a personal fight against an establishment. Ah, what a luxury for you.
But Bob was very consciously wanting to break the literary mold. He did a huge amount of work like that. But I think what's sad is that Bob he died before all this internet stuff, and his work is still not very well known. And I have so many valuable memories that I like to pass on to anybody who will listen about what he was doing. And he really helped to get all our work better known in his particular circles. He was indefatigable.
I think, just quick interjection, I think what Paul is saying about Bob Cobbing and the need to recognize his contributions is very, very interesting and important, and hopefully will happen. Now we're going to, I think, Karl or Jim. I
was going to address his question, because I think one of the reasons the Cleveland concrete poets have been overlooked is specifically because they were street poets. They were anti-academic, they were anti-establishment. And they were also not allied with the Fluxists. They were allied with the beat poets. When Levy was arrested and Jim's bookstore was raided and 5 cartons of irreplaceable collected books were never given back, it was the beat poets who came to the aid, not the Fluxists, not the academics. The beat poets, Ginsberg, Sanders, and a bunch of the beat poets and their allies and street poets created funds to bail them out of jail.
Oh, yeah.
So you hit the bullseye on the politics, because one of the points I try to make in my paper is that there is within American visual poetics a deep rift of exclusion, and that the academic clique has control of the narrative. And that's one of the reasons I write the articles that I write. I'm an independent, I'm not academic. I don't have any academic resource behind me. I don't have the money to go to archives to do the work. I have found a major source of visual poetry history that has been totally overlooked, which is Henry Brizon's work. It sits in Columbia's archives. His diaries hold the true story of European visual poetry that began with him, not Al Polnier, who is held high as the individual, so on and so forth. So the politics of this is throughout, even though we try not to be political in our expression and try to be above it, underneath, there is this unfortunate oversight of the street individual independents that have done a lot of work, and it has been ignored. And Bob, as you point out, is one.
Still, Bob is better recognized than he was, because his grandson did a lot of work and produced a project, and they finally published this book with, I think it's B and then there's 9 O's and then K in it. And that's all about his life. And, you know, a lot of the younger people are very interested in it.
Well, that's good to hear. Because the concrete story of Cleveland, I was fortunate enough to be in touch with an individual who is still alive, Kent Taylor, who was in partnerships more or less with Levy. So I have the firsthand story of what was going on. And he thought he was going to be long dead before this story was raised into the public mind of the visual poets. And so there's a few of the Cleveland concrete poets still alive that need to be reached out to flesh out much more than I was able to do.
Yeah.
Jim, did you want to add anything?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question, Demosthenes. I haven't been to Athens, would love to one of these days. I've read a lot of, I consider myself, you know, something of a Pythagorean. And
okay, that's for sure. With mathematics and cosmos, you are in Pythagorean tradition, that's for sure.
And I've read a lot of pre-Socratic philosophy and of course Plato and so, you know, yeah. Well, and so the politics of the online, yeah, very important. You know, in my previous life as a radio art guy, I was producing radio art in this medium, radio, that is largely out of control, commercial. And yet there are these little outposts of radio art, very important, I would say. They, you know, they're relatively small in the total radio landscape, which is, you know, just commercial and crazy. But these outposts of very interesting radio art, to me, are very important. And and similarly, you know, with the internet, much of it has now become crazy, not just commercial, but propagandizing, misinformation. So much of it has gone that way, and it was very different from that when we first began in like 1995, 1996.
Right.
But still, there are these outposts on the internet. We're in one right now of interesting art and discussion and communication. So I guess my approach is to try to foster and create and participate in the interesting progressive ones while I'm on Facebook. I haven't abandoned Facebook yet. I realize it's pretty bad. But wouldn't it be interesting for writers and artists to create an alternative to Facebook that was, you know,
wow,
tailored to what we like, what we need, in the spirit what we need. And I think it'd be great to create such a thing. But it's a dream of mine at this point. I'm not sure how to get it started.
Well, they've done it through groups.
Through groups. It's still Facebook.
Yeah, well.
It's still
right.
the ads, the environment, the surveillance, it's still Facebook. But there are some good things on Facebook too, yeah. So that's a partial pathetic answer on my part, Demosthenes.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Can we open it up to any other thoughts or comments from the audience?
Nancy, please. Odile has a question for Jim. Odile Cisneros.
Oh, great.
Odile, você quer falar no microfone?
Oh, hi, Odile.
Oh dear.
I'm not able to understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Some poetry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
It's getting better.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah, I guess maybe just keep going and the technology will say, oh, give her some bandwidth.
We have her.
You can hear me.
Much better. Much
can
better.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had a question. So, so very, very interesting to see your work, and I work mostly with Brazilian poetry, but I've dabbled a little bit also, explored a little bit the Canadian scene, and I'm always curious why sound poetry was so popular in Canada. Like, it seems to me like had such a huge moment, especially in the 70s. And, with Bill Bissett and with, like you mentioned, Steve McCaffrey. And so I'm just curious in general, why Canada that became so popular more than the visual, even though, and in some ways, like I see somebody like Christian Buck, who's doing, he's in Australia now, but he's done all this stuff mostly with sound, right? Started out mostly, and now he's doing stuff with, I don't know, with, biology and genetics and outer space and things like that, literally out there. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, we do have an interesting campus community radio network that spans Canada. All of the universities basically have their own campus community station that involve not just the universities, but the communities, and there's campus community involvement, people from both the community and the universities, and these radio stations are alternative to the commercial stuff. So I think that's an important part of it. But also sound poetry, is also there's a good performance. There are good performance spaces around Canada for artist-run centers, and there's generally people involved in experimental literature in these venues. So that might have something to do with it. And Bill Bissett, Bill Bissett has been going back and touring Canada back and forth since the 60s. He's an amazing force that he probably knows more about every place in Canada than anybody else, because he's always touring it, and of course he's a great sound poet as well, and so Bill has had something to do with it, that's for sure.
May I come in here? It seems to me that the Canada Council has put in a lot of money, a lot of support to all the Canadian poets, because we got to know them pretty well because we were at that festival in 1978, and of course we knew Bill and dear BP Nicol. It was such a tragedy, you know, when he died, and he told me, I've lugged that concrete poetry stuff all over the country and I've done in my back, and that's what killed him, a tumor on his back. But he was such a passion for it, and he created a lovely cooperative atmosphere. And so I think this helped. And, BP and Nicol told me, because I went to stay with them in 1984 when I was doing this performance at the Harbourfront Arts Centre. And he said, in this room, Paula, I have got all Canadian literature. And he said, we get such support because we have got to defend ourselves against those people down in the USA. And that's why they got a lot of money, because it's important to get the money, isn't it? I mean, Bill's been, you know, he has had a lot of financial help. I mean, he's a great person. But, you know, they have had a lot of support because they do want to show, well, the Canadians wish to show that they can, you know, they're strong enough to be equal to America. And that's a pretty tricky thing to do.
Well, Bill has not had much financial support, neither have I. But yeah, apparently there's some money out there somewhere.
But he's had grants, hasn't he? I know he's had grants. Because
Bill?
Bob Cobbing used to tell me that Bill, you know, I mean, the Canada Council has given him grants just to tour about. So I understand.
Well, I don't see any mansion at this point, but
well, maybe
except you know, the imaginary one.
You know, 1970s, 1980s. I'm thinking of. That's when I knew him really well. And he came to Britain in 1992, and I got him some performances. One in the Royal Festival Hall, the Poetry Library, and another here in Oxford with Adina Karasik.
Ah, yeah. With whom I collaborate now.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Good.
I think, not to interrupt, but I think we need to draw our panel to a close.
Yeah.
Please, I hope people will contact one another with further questions and ideas and comments. This was really interesting and a real interesting range of speakers. So yeah, I learned a lot. And I just want to thank everybody very, very much for participating. Thank you.
Lovely.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.
We close, Julio? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. It was
chair
total pleasure.
This panel.
Okay. Bye-bye.
We see you again in Friday.
Yes. Yes.
On Friday.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here again is the link to
thank you, Karl.
The writings.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was great and pleasure to know your work too.
Oh.